Welcome to Comedians in Elevators podcast, and I've got my guest, Oswald Hunter. Before I introduce Oswald, let me read a quote that he has from his website because this, I think, explains this is one of the most profound things that I've heard. I'll just read it real quick. Acting is the art of wearing emotions like costumes, stepping into imaginary worlds, and revealing the humanity that connects us all every performance. A unique exploration of truth and imagination. Oswald, please tell us about yourself.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, Keenan. Well, as you said, my name is Oswald. I'm born and raised in the Netherlands, and from the age of 31, I moved to Sweden. This year, I actually moved away from Sweden to start a new life in Italy. Reason being, I love exploring, I love meeting new communities, and I want to expand my acting career as well. And Italy offered me the opportunity to do so.
Very cool. Can you elaborate a little bit on how Italy? I know there's a strong community there. There's Community dell'Arte historically, so I don't know if that has any connection, but is that
Not directly. The community here is much more human bound. People here actually care about the human relations rather than prove what you're worth and maybe we'll give you a chance. Here it's actually, we're going to give you a chance, show us what you got, and helping each other. This community is very creative. They're very interested in helping each other. So instead of feeling you have to do it all by yourself and figuring it out, there's actually a strong community that shows like we're there to get better at what you do.
so I can't agree with that more. I mean, that's literally what I'm doing here with Comedians and Elevators podcast is that we have a huge online community and it's growing. And this is the future of media. So let's get right into it. Let me read basically the premise, right? So the idea here is to compare and contrast the comedian, which I define as a funny person telling any joke, versus the comic, who's any person telling funny jokes. So really, if you're going to be on stage doing stand-up or comedy at all, it's two sides of the same coin. So let's start with the first question. The role of persona in comedy. How much of the comedian's voice is a character versus their real self?
Hmm. I think every comedian takes something of himself into the performance. I do feel like they're not portraying themselves on stage as they are in real life. I think the biggest part or the biggest role of a comedian is take actual events, turn it into something provocative and turn it into something that gets people to think for themselves with a laughter.
So would you say that, I mean, this is a loaded question, but that authenticity matters, or is the illusion part of the magic?
No, I think authenticity really matters. I can only draw it from an experience as an actor, but if you don't bring truth to the stage, your audience will not be captivated. And I think that goes the same for a comedian as well. If there's nothing authentic about a comedian and he's just playing one-liners, hoping for a laugh, there's nothing that is going to engage the audience as much as when a comedian has something profound from himself in his act.
I totally agree. We're going to get into it deeper because there is a value of having one-liners because you can pivot quickly if you've got enough of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So punching up versus punching down. Where do comics versus comedians stand on this? So is the audience's agreement with the comedian a form of permission or alignment?
I guess it depends on what you want to achieve. I mean, I'm a big fan of punching up. Um, Putting yourself in a more vulnerable position as a comedian gets a lot more done than punching down and just pinpoint to somebody in the audience and make fun of them, whether it's with one-liners or a very elaborate joke. Um,
Or a group in particular, which is what we usually see.
yeah, exactly. It depends on the comedian. I've seen several comedians that are very strong in handing out punches at a certain group, but in a way that makes you actually more attached and connected to that specific group. Um,
As a member of
I've
that group or not?
Sorry.
Would that comedian is he punching it as a member of the group or not as a member of the group?
Oh, definitely as a member of the group. in
Okay.
most cases, but I've also seen them punch at groups that have nothing in common with the comedian spoken about those things. Um,
That's an
but
interesting. Can I throw right at you? Would you consider that punching in a neutral direction at that point? Because you're neither up or down if it's in your group. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. When it's in your demographic, yeah, you're basically punching neutral. Um, and once again, what I like about that type of comedy is that they engage the audience. It is, with a lack of better word, provocative.
Hmm.
It engages the audience to actually go deeper into the topic and think about it for themselves. When he's punching at a demographic that he has no relationship with at all, he or she for that matter, um, it becomes this thin line. But then who gets offended? I think being the one that gets offended is something that is in my control. Um, and what is the purpose of the joke? I can clearly tell when they're punching outside of their demographic whether they have a purpose of building a community or tearing down a community.
That's very interesting. So just to linger a little bit on the punching up part,
Yeah,
could you can think of an example? Like when I think of Eat the Rich, that to me is a punching up example. Would
yeah,
you agree?
absolutely, absolutely. There's one comedian that comes to mind that is always putting himself, I feel, below or at least in the middle of his audience, and that is John Panette. If I look at his comedy shows, he is very good at always punching up. He's always making fun of himself, but in such a genuine way. It doesn't feel like he has bad self-esteem, but all his jokes are mainly about him and his character work. If I take another example, um, I could take Chris Rock, who is very good at punching up at the riches within the black community. He does it in such a powerful way. He doesn't put himself above that demographic. He doesn't put himself below the demographic. And somehow he is still able to give those punches up like, hey, listen, those of you who feel above the rest, calm down a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting perspective because I would say that at this point he is the rich. No?
Yeah, well, considering all he's been through in life, I have no idea how much
Uh,
money he still possesses, but
right,
yeah.
right, right. The life
And
experience kind of makes it more grounded.
exactly. Depending on what you define as riches, I don't see a fat bank account as riches, but if I see what he's been through, what he established for himself, not just a name, but the circles in which he surrounds himself, I would definitely say he's rich still. Yeah,
No, I agree. The meaning is the most valuable currency, but we all recognize dollars, so that that's usually the easy way to kind of
yeah,
fi figure out who that demographic is. All right. So
exactly.
cultural translation of comedy. How do jokes that work in one country bomb in another? So are comics more
Wow.
universal while comedians are more culturally specific?
Well, I was born and raised Dutch, and I know for the fact that some of the jokes I hear coming from my culture would not be appreciated in the American culture. That's for sure.
Is that
I
because it's
do
not
feel
understood, or is it why would you think they wouldn't be appreciated?
um, because we make jokes absolutely not politically correct. But we don't mean anything by it either. We have no incentive to tell our jokes. We're just blunt in the way we speak, in the way we act, in the way we tell our jokes. Some things are also absolutely non-translatable. It is the experience we have as a nation. I do feel that a lot of comics I see coming from different countries. There's a famous comedian coming from Finland.
Mhm.
The way he presents himself and also the way he talks about certain demographics is very international. We all have the same feeling. We all see the same issues happening. And whether you're from America, whether you're from Europe, whether you're from Eastern Europe or Arab countries, I think there's a common ground in which we can agree on how you treat each other and what the current topics are when it comes to politics. I think it becomes more of an issue when you talk about certain cultural things, especially for me, when I see artists coming from France and they talk about certain things that happen in France. it becomes non-relatable. Then the punching up and punching down becomes a serious issue, because I start to feel that they are punching down deliberately just to hurt somebody, but I don't understand the background of the joke.
That's a great point. I mean, that basically hits right to it. So it's transformed into something else. Like they didn't intend it, but now that's what it's become. And you see it from that context, and now everything is messed up and nobody's laughing. That's the end result.
Basically, I mean, we all know Ricky Gervais.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of stuff I can laugh about with him, and there's a lot of stuff that I don't know exactly the history of that joke,
Right.
which gets me a little bit on the edge of like, okay, am I going to laugh about this, or am I going to take a little bit of a step back to let somebody else judge that joke?
That's interesting. Would you say that's a comic? These jokes are more comedic, meaning you almost have to know the history of the joke to follow it?
Yeah, a lot of things. I mean, we all, I think most of us have seen the Oscar presentation Ricky Gervais has done. There's a lot of inside humor presented
Okay.
there.
Right.
There's a lot of relationship mentioned in a very nuanced way,
Right.
which creates a little bit of a misunderstanding. Like, okay, so why was this funny? It just
Right.
feels like you're attacking the hand that feeds you.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, when it comes to media here, it seems like everyone's on eggshells, and that's probably why it's dying, right? And so, we're doing it this way now, and to me, this is the way it's going to be in the future.
Yeah, yeah. As somebody that observes the comedic industry, I mean, we can talk about Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais, and many others. Um, I don't feel that the artist who presents the jokes should adapt to the sensitivity of the audience. I'm very much keen, as well as an actor. You don't like the movie, don't watch it. You don't like the jokes, don't watch it. If you give it attention, it's going to become something much bigger than it's meant to be. Choose your fights. There's boundaries, yeah, but who are we to tell what those boundaries are? Because my background and my cultural heritage gives a certain package than somebody that is born and raised in the States, or somebody that is born and raised in, let's say, Dubai.
I think that's a profound statement, and that's leaning towards the definition of a comedian, because that's the person on the inside. They're like the comic who has a huge, hopefully, a huge repertoire of jokes, one-liners, and they can go in every direction, is definitely bouncing off of the audience, right? They want to make sure that they're constantly laughing, especially if it's a diverse group. So he's basically going to be telling a different joke to a different person, and everyone else is waiting for their turn, right? But the comedian doesn't do that.
No, exactly. And I feel that sometimes it's also misunderstood on how much effort a comedian, a true comedian, puts into his jokes. The amount of research the comedians do to actually get a joke to work is immense. Um, it feels like it's often forgotten when you're sitting there and you're having a laugh. You go like, "Oh, this is a really funny guy." No, but he's not just funny. It came from somewhere. He has studied his craft. He has made this joke by trial and error. He has tried to make it fit as many people as possible. And if you're not one of them, that's very unfortunate, but so be it. It's not the lack of him trying to make the joke, it is the lack of understanding, which seems to develop in the world more and more. We have a lack of understanding.
No, I agree 100%. That's 100%. So that kind of leans to the next one. So crowd work versus crafted work. So I would say that comics riff, like they go off the cuff more, and comedians perform, kind of like you're
Yeah,
saying, it's very crafted. So
yeah.
where's the sweet spot, right? So what happens when a comic leans too much into crowd work, or when a comedian, well, gets heckled because he's just sticking to his character?
Yeah, for me personally, and this is a matter of taste, right? A comedian that has done the effort in storytelling. I think Dave Chappelle, you may think of him what you want. His craft shows the experience, the skill in which he creates his material, shows that he's not only good in working the crowd, he's also doing the research in making comedy. He can start off, there's a big example with him giving the punchline, then building this elaborate story, engaging the audience in that story to, after 10 minutes, come back and circle around to that punchline. That shows craft.
You're not
When
the only one
a
that's person that said that about Dave Chappelle. It's very interesting. I'm trying to conjure examples of that because it's very hard to pin down personally. I don't know if you can think of one off. I mean, it'd be hard
oh
to describe because it's in a story basically.
yeah, well, I don't remember. Well, I don't think it's appropriate to say the punchline on air like this, but it was about a certain region of the female body, and he
Uh-huh.
said, "I'll kick her in that part."
Ah,
That was the punchline. Without any hesitation, his timing is so immaculate that he turned that into a story that went on for 10 minutes, circled back to specifically that punchline. It's
that's.
been on one of his specials. Um,
Do you
and
remember how long
re-
ago that was? Was it recent or many years? Because I don't
oh
recall.
yeah, no, just a couple of months ago. Just a
Oh,
couple of
okay.
months ago.
Oh, then I
Yeah,
better find out.
I think actually when you put it on Google or you go on YouTube and you search for starting with punchline David Chappelle,
Okay.
you'll get it. You'll get it immediately. Um, and then when I see some of the younger comics that are just focused on audience, to circle back to your question, I feel hits dead spots all the time, and
Hmm.
it turns often in just this game of, like you said, punching down. And for me, that it's not that engaging. It is funny, yeah, but it distracts too much. I'd rather have somebody really tell me a story and makes everybody a part of it instead of just picking out somebody and just continue to attack somebody on either their career choice, on their sexual preferences, on their faith, or on their cultural heritage, just to get a quick laugh. And I
It's hard
think
to. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
no,
No, I was going to say it's hard. It's hard to punch up when you're roasting somebody, right? You're picking on an audience member. Oh, you're so amazing. You're so smart, but I don't know anything about you. How is that even funny, right? So it's impossible, I think, to actually punch up when you're trying to do crowd work. Would you agree?
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you see some of the younger artists that started out with a lot of crowd work evolving into the comedian. Some of them you see break through and actually make sustainable careers for themselves. But the comics that are just focused on crowd work, I don't see that often. I see them pass by on whatever social media platform. I see them come across YouTube at one point, and then it dies off again. So after a
Mhm.
very short reign on the eye, it's gone.
Hmm.
And where the comedian stands out is finding that balance and constantly being aware that it is a craft you're working on. It is something you need to develop. You never stop learning doing it.
Well, that definitely leads to the next question. So, which is censorship and offense. Does a comic avoid offense while a comedian courts it to prove a point? You know that place where you're not conscious and you're not sleeping either? That's your power bill to the electric company. Right here. I want us to be here with free energy, where the Wardenclyffe Tower meets the Eiffel Tower. But that's not where we are. We are here, where you've got the utility and you've got residential solar. Between these two, we know which one saves you money. This is where we can go in the meantime. But this is where I want us to be now, and this can be done now. So let me deputize you to represent DOSE, Department of Solar Efficiency, and let's get on the podcast and get the message out today. See you soon.
I think that's very valid, actually. I'm very happy that comedians use it to get across a point.
Mm-hmm.
If you're too focused on being politically correct, if you're too focused on not being offensive, then what is the message you're trying to get across? Just bite your tongue and fit in, and what? Make sure that nobody gets offended, and oh boy, I offended somebody, so the next time I'm going to leave it out. Or are you actually trying to address some really important topics? And yeah, that might offend some people, but don't you need to offend people in order to get the truth?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I see it. A lot of that's I get a lot of pushback because of that. All right, advertising and self promotion. Who advertises themselves more, the comic or the comedian?
The comic.
Okay.
The,
Would you say
I,
that?
Yeah, the comic needs to show himself out in the world, so you see them everywhere. Um, I haven't seen a comedian that much on, let's say, TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. The comedian lets the work talk for himself or herself. The comic is really working to get out there.
Interesting. Do you think that might be because the comic uses shorter jokes and the comedian uses longer story type jokes?
I want to say necessarily, in my opinion, of course, that it has to do with the length of the joke. It has to
Right.
do with the sincerity, the profoundness of the joke. What are you talking about? What is your message? I like laughing just like anybody else, but do you actually have something worth telling and making me laugh while doing it? Or is it just my next door neighbor making a bad joke about a cat?
Yeah, right. Well, would you say that self-promotion is, would you see it as selling out or is it necessary for survival?
Nah, in this day and age, it's really necessary for survival. Unless you've already really established a name in the industry. I mean, we've talked about a few of the giants. They established a name since the 80s, 90s. The up and comers now that actually want to pursue being a comedian, they are bound to social media and promotion because we are used to having this fast going industry. We need quick and easy. And a
So
part of
you
that
would,
is,
yeah, no, is to do, I mean, I would say it's to do both. So if you want to focus on developing the craft is to be a comedian. But if you need to promote yourself, especially on TikTok and short form video, you need jokes, like
yeah,
quick, short one-liner jokes just to get yourself seen, right? So sounds like, at least for myself, that this is really something to focus on is two sides of the same coin, right?
exactly. But then once again, like I said, for me, it has nothing to do with the length or the shortness of the joke. I want you to capture me with the joke. What are you
Right.
saying? What is the intent behind the joke? And you can do it in 5 words or 500 words. Did you capture my imagination of what you're talking about?
Yeah. All right, timing and delivery. Is it a science or an art? So, do comics rely more on structure and comedians more on rhythm and emotion?
I find that a very difficult one to answer for specifically a comic. I know when I look at a comedian that he has been perfecting his timing through trial and error. With a comic, yeah, I do believe that a timing is a part of it and structure is definitely a part of it. Where I see the difference is that when a comic is been thrown off guard by either a heckler or by a mistake, he tries to grab back to his structure, and a comedian is capable of giving that ad lib, giving that
Mhm.
improvisation to circle back to his structure.
I think
I,
you parsed that one pretty good. I mean, you figured out exactly the nuance between the two for sure. All right,
I
should we
can
move
only
on?
tell. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Sorry.
No, no, no. Please go ahead. It's
I
that's
was
why
gonna
we're here.
say, as an actor, when I read a script, you take away all the commas, you take all the pauses out of there, and then you have a director that gives you the opportunity to feel your character. And I think a comedian is much like that. He's gonna feel the joke. It's much more intrinsic. It's much more natural. And then with having studied the craft, that timing, that structure is just so integrated with each other that that's where the comedian shines against the comic.
I'm gonna ask a question that hopefully leans more into the script world. When
Yeah,
you're as an actor, when you're reading a script for, well, when you're reading a script, do you wish that it was written more for you as a person, or are you more interested in adapting to what the words on the page say?
I want it to be as far away from me as possible. Um, that gives me truly the opportunity to build a character that is true to the story we're trying to tell. If a script is really matching me as a person, I'm too keen to grab back of real life experiences, and then I'm not focused on portraying that character. I'm just being me with lines. So
Now,
no, let
what if it were written where that's actually the goal?
I think I would have a conversation with the director on if there's any specifics that I'm missing in that script. But once again, I would do my research. When I get a script, I'm gonna deep dive into that character. I'm gonna find out who that character has been hanging with, how he was raised, where he was raised, what his favorite food is, what kind of sneakers he is wearing, the kind of clothes, how much money does he spend on clothing, all those minute details which are going to make that character. And if then my personal character traits come into play and it feeds that character, sure thing. I just find it easier when a script is not me at all.
I'm going to have to keep up on this one for a second because, as many people know, that I wrote this script outline called Robotero, which I haven't sent to you yet, so you may not know about it, but it's based off of the MBTI. And the
Okay.
whole goal is there's archetypal characters. The whole script is written 125 scene action comedy. But what I'm trying to do is write the dialogue based off of the actor's personality type, and that they're whoever's playing opposite them is also a direct result of what the MBTI would suggest would be the opposite of them. So it's I think a new concept, but that's what I'm trying to bring to the table. It's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast is to get that message out, and hopefully I can show you that and explain it in more detail, and then maybe we can do a second round for comedians and elevators. Would that Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to reading that. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, let's go to the next question. So,
Yeah.
laughter versus applause. Are comics chasing laughs and comedians chasing applause breaks that validate the message?
I honestly haven't thought about that before. I do feel that comedians value more the applause as a validation. It's like the trophy of their work. I think a laugh is easy to get. Getting an applause is a much higher level of gratification. I can only assume for a comedian.
That's where I'm leaning. You're probably the first person that's not necessarily a comic or comedian that's agreed. So
Okay,
we're on the same page on that one. All right,
that's
next
good.
question. Comedy as a commentary. So when does a comedian cross into becoming a philosopher or a preacher?
Hmm. I think a comedian actually takes daily subjects where the majority can connect to. Um, I
But
like
does
Cat
he?
Williams. I
Okay.
like Cat Williams, for example, and his way of integrating what is happening in society into his comedic sense, into his storytelling. I find that very poetic. Some of his jokes, I go like, "Oh boy, I would never have said that," but he makes it work somehow. I think that's his skill and his charm.
Well, that's a great example. So the question is that potentially diluting his humor
I don't think it's diluting his humor. I think it's really important to him, and I
for him
think he's
specifically?
yeah, exactly. And I think in the essence of being a comedian, you take the subjects that are very important to you. I mean, Chris Rock made jokes about his divorce.
Mhm.
I would never, if I ever would go to a divorce, I would never use it as a comedic sketch. But he did it. And it's so incredibly powerful. And it's the same when I hear Ricky Gervais talk about religion and faith and what it does for him, or the lack of it, what it does for him. When I hear Cat Williams or Dave Chappelle talk about serious issue, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's religion, whether it's the American politics or foreign politics, I think they take a sense of what is important to them to convey that to the world. That is their platform. Some people become a journalist, other people write blogs, some become social media influencers. They use their platform as a comedian.
Very good. All right. Second to last question. Comedy and vulnerability. Do comics hide behind their joke? Well, assuming, oh, this is a tough one. I'm going to say it like this. I think that comics do hide behind their jokes and comedians do expose themselves. So, obviously, in that perspective, which one is braver than the other? we know that, I mean, it would be the comedian. But do you believe it's true that comics hide behind their jokes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've never seen a comedic put himself in a vulnerable position ever, ever. I see comics always putting up this bravado, and I know what I'm seeing is not them in real life. They're there to entertain and to use it as a step up for them, whereas a comedian really uses his or her platform to integrate themselves with the audience.
I still like this question, even though it's kind of an obvious answer. It's good. It leads to the last one. So, last question, legacy. So, about legacy, who gets remembered? Will the comics tight five, which we've already assumed, if they're not the brave one, will that
No,
survive more, or will the comedian's cultural point of view be more timeless?
the comedian for sure. I mean, without a doubt, we all still remember Robin Williams.
Mm-hmm.
We can still rephrase his jokes to the dot. That's the comedian for you. They put in the work and the effort, and I think unless a comic really gets aware of where they're trying to go with their career, they'll be forgotten.
Well, with that one, I think that will end this episode of Comedians and Elevators podcast. Oswald, is there anywhere where you like everyone to find you online?
Oh, they can find me on Instagram at I'm Oswald Hunter. They're more than welcome to look me up on Facebook under the same tagline as well. And they can always reach out through me on my website, oswaldhunter.com.
I agree. That's where I read the quote from, and he has a very clean website. Really, like it very much.
Appreciate
It's
it, Keenan.
visually appealing in a way that's because we want interactivity a lot on websites, but this one's got the right balance.
Perfect.
Everyone, please like and subscribe so you can be notified for the next episode of Comedians and Elevators podcast, and we will see you all in the next one.